Hi and welcome to iQuanta's channel dedicated to your success. This session is all about the analysis of XAT 2025, the exam which was conducted on 5th of January 2025. So this is the session where I talk about the difficulty level and the composition of every section. Alongside that, I'll talk about the expected score versus percentiles. So stay tuned. Now, when the exam got over, we conducted a rather longish session where we talked about what we felt about the exam, and we also received a lot of inputs from you. We continue to do that. We continue to receive more and more inputs, and we'll keep refining what we have to say. But until then, here is something that will help you immensely in evaluating the exam. But before I do that, hey, in case you are somebody who went on to write the exam, how did it go for you? कैसा गया? अपने नीचे कमेंट में बताना यार. हाँ, मज़ा आएगा देख करके कि क्या आपने, कैसा एग्जाम गया, क्या आपने सीखा, कैसा सब हुआ. So that'll be absolutely fantastic. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the paper pattern. So when we talk about XAT 2025, this is what we saw in the exam. So now in this particular thing, if I look at part 1, there is no surprise there. I think part 1 is now more or less stabilized. So we know what to expect in part 1, right? So 3 sections, but no sectional time limit. So we got 26 in verbal and logical ability, then 21 in decision making, 28 in quant and data interpretation. Part 2, of course, changed this year. Until last year, we had an essay writing section, but then, well, not exactly a section, it was part of the general knowledge section, it's part of part 2. But this year, they actually removed it from this particular part, and we were left with 20 GK questions. As usual, you got +1 for every right, minus 0.25 for every wrong, and if you leave any question unattempted, well, for the first 8 questions there is no penalty, but beyond the 8 questions they start deducting a minus 0.1 for every unattempted question. So that brings in an additional element. Of course, there was no negative marking for part 2 GK, and therefore goes without saying that we'd at least attempt each and every question. And it was a 3-hour test, 10 minutes for GK, another 170 minutes for the part 1 with all those 3 sections. Now, if I dive into individual sections there, then quant and DI, as usual, 28 questions, out of which 16 questions belonged to quantitative aptitude. So we had, of course, we had questions from arithmetic, so ratio proportion, averages, profit loss. I think I remember one time and work question as well, but I'm not very sure. So I think around 3 odd questions from arithmetic, then you had questions from algebra, questions from geometry, and as usual when it comes to modern math, XAT gives it a slightly higher weightage as compared to the CAT. So we did have those modern math questions as well, and thereafter there is this. So you had questions from numbers, etc. So all those miscellaneous categories. Now this quant part, now I don't really teach quant, I teach VALR. So whatever I say about quant, take it with a pinch of salt. But my colleagues who focus on quant also agree with me that we found that the quant bit happened to be relatively easier. So a tad bit easier as compared to what we saw in the XAT exam last year. But if we talk about data interpretation, we had 12 questions. So there were 4 sets. Every set gave us 3 questions each. But these questions turned out to be a little trickier as compared to what we saw in the XAT exam लास्ट ईयर. सो कहीं ना कहीं वो देख रहे हैं थोड़ा सा बैलेंस हो रहा है कि यार क्वांट थोड़ा चैलेंजिंग, डीआई रिलेटिवली थोड़ा इजी, मगर आई थिंक क्वांट थोड़ा कंपैरेटिवली ज़्यादा इजी था, डीआई में चैलेंज उतना बड़ा शायद नहीं था, एंड देयरफॉर आई एक्सपेक्ट द कट ऑफ टू गो अप स्लाइटली or the marks required to score your requisite percentile slightly when it comes to until around 90-95 percentile. For 99 percentile, I expect a decent jump at that particular level. Then if I talk about decision making section, as usual for the last 3 years we've been witnessing that 7 sets with 3 questions each. Now this year I found 2 key changes. The first was that there was no quant based set here. So there was no set where there was data and you had to evaluate it, analyze it. So what we typically call quant based DM, we did not see that. So all the cases were essentially cases that were meant for laypersons, but the length of the cases was a little higher. So the number of words that you had to read per question, that went up, which does introduce a little bit of challenge in terms of the time availability. But even here, I found the overall level to be a little easier as compared to last year. It does not mean that it was an easy section, not at all. Decision making is something that stumps people year after year, and even this year there were a couple of questions where the ideal option that you would think of was not even there, and there were at least three questions where it's very difficult to pick up the best answer choice unless you go down to the brass tacks and you start thinking of the risk involved, the cost involved, and the objectives. Unless you list it all down, it became really touch and go. But as compared to last year, although it was lengthy, the ambiguity level uh, was a little low for some additional questions. And once again, therefore, I would expect that the cutoffs in decision making should also inch up a little bit. And finally, if we talk about VALR, absolutely no surprises. We had 5 passages with 3 questions each. I think I would barely call, I think probably there are these 3 questions that I'd call easy to moderate. But the rest of the questions in typical XAT fashion were challenging with close answer choices, a fair bit of ambiguity. So that was fun. Fun for me when I was going through that, because then, you just look at the mind of the examiner and you're like, wow. But that said, even in terms of the composition of passages, no surprises. We know that there are these certain areas of philosophy, certain areas of social challenges that they do get into, and this year was no different. So we saw that. But out of these 5 passages, there were 2 passages which were easier to read. The questions maybe not so, but 2 passages were such that if you go by the subject matter and the language of the passage, you would have prioritized those over the others. Now, out of the 15 questions in RC, we had 7 questions which were based on critical reasoning, and all of those 7 were actually inference based questions. So a lot of emphasis to this particular segment. And then, as usual, we had a poem with 2 questions. Both the questions were very challenging. Although when I looked at the second question and the options, I was confused between 2 answer choices in the first one, which talked about what the poem is about. When I looked at the second one, it helped me resolve the issue even for the first question. And I've seen that happening multiple times in poetry-based comprehension. No figure of speech question this year in RCs or poems. Then we had 2 grammar-based questions which were essentially focused on error identification. The focus was in areas like prepositions and adjectives and irregular plurals of nouns. Then 2 parajumbles, moderate. If you are somebody who is decent at parajumbles and you combine that with the options that are available, I think these were definitely doable. Then 3 critical reasoning questions. All the 3 were inference based questions, and man, one of these was very difficult, one of these was difficult, and the third one was a moderate question. So I would expect everybody to get at least one of these right. For a good student, it can even be 2 questions right. And then there was a fill in the blank, just 1 question. And if I look at the difficulty level of that question as compared to what we got in the last couple of years, it was easier. Not easy in absolute terms, easier than what we have seen in the last couple of years. And as usual, there was this 1 question which was a little difficult to slot under a single category. We had one such question even last year, where they talked about cricket and Rahul Dravid and I think Rohit Sharma and whatnot. This year, instead of giving us words, they basically gave us a single panel of a comic strip, and we were supposed to interpret it. So in a way, a bit like critical reading. So this one unusual question, we have been witnessing it for quite a few years now. This year, it came in the form of a comic panel. A rather interesting question though. The rather interesting comic panel though. And even that had a touch of philosophy, a touch of psychology, and that made it all very interesting. But overall, I'd say VLR was quite similar to what we saw last year. So I would not really expect the cutoff of VLR to be significantly different from what we saw last year. So what was the cutoff last year? When we talk about XAT 2024, this is what we thought. These are the cutoffs that we actually witnessed. So if you are somebody, let's just focus on 99 percentile. So you needed to have around 33 and a half to get a 99 percentile. And you know that in order to get into XLRI Jamshedpur, if you are a male candidate, you are basically looking at 97 percentile plus. Female maybe a couple of marks less, maybe even at 96, maybe even lower. We have seen those cases. But most of the majority of the calls that we get, if you are above 90, you would be able to apply to quite a few of those colleges that take admissions on the basis of the XAT score above 95, and you'd perhaps, depending upon your profile and background, even have a shot at XLRI Jamshedpur. That was last year. This year, although we are still fine-tuning the data as and when more and more information comes in, but we have kept the bias on the higher side. So please keep in mind that this is likely to get revised, and if it gets revised, it is likely to get revised downwards. ओके सो अभी टोटल स्कोर अभी मैं 99 परसेंटाइल के लिए इसमें बोल रहा हूँ 42. अगर करेक्शन होगी तो मुझे लगता है 42 से नीचे आके शायद 41 40 हो जाए, बट ऊपर नहीं जाएगा. ओके सो इससे कम से कम किसी के लिए भी ये मिसलीडिंग नहीं होगा. सो 42 for 99, and the same for these individual sections. You can check it here. We also shared with you yesterday, and if you happen to have any take on this, make sure that you do drop it down in the comments below, and you can reach out to us on the Facebook group as well. So that's about that, and I think I should change the title as well. Acha, that was XAT 24. This is XAT 25. Let me fix it right now. जल्दी में मुझे ध्यान नहीं रहा, तो मैं उसको अभी आपके लिए फिक्स कर देता हूँ. So this is what we believe the cutoffs are likely to be this year, and as I said, we are leaning towards the higher side. अगर कुछ correction होगा तो थोड़ा downward pressure add हो जाएगा, but the most important thing is the exam is done, and that takes care of almost all the major exams. So unless you are somebody who's appearing for CMAT or Maharashtra CET, now you can afford to relax for a bit and then plan ahead. Or in short, I would want to leave you with this thought: let it be. So whatever has happened has happened. Your job as an aspirant is over. You can start focusing on the next round of selection or the next set of plans depending upon how your exams went. And do keep in mind that we are absolutely there with you always. So if you need us, we're just going to be a message away. Take care and have a great day ahead.